Herzlich willkommen zum UnleashPeople Podcast, dem Podcast für alle, die HR und Talent Acquisition strategisch denken. Wir, Ina und Christian, liefern euch gemeinsam mit Expertinnen und Experten regelmäßig frische Insights, die euch und euer Unternehmen voranbringen. Heute sprechen wir mit Sibila Erdei, Talent und Mental Health Strategist bei Nebo über Red Flags im Recruiting und wie wir sie vermeiden können. Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of the UnleashPeople podcast. Today, again, we have a very special guest, Sibila, and she will speak about or inform us about red flags in disguise when hiring. So it's a very interesting topic, and I guess everybody fell into that trap at least once, if not very, very often. So yeah, let's see where this discussion is going to lead us. Sibila, what's your understanding of red flags in disguise when hiring?
Yeah, well, oftentimes, like the first thing that comes to our mind is the obvious stuff, which is if the candidate fits or doesn't fit the job description and the things that just kind of seem obvious. But I think it's really important to talk about the ones that are not so obvious, that are more subtle in hiring when it comes to top talent, which I don't necessarily like to use that term, but for the sake of this discussion, we can use it. And I think it's just important also to say that this is not about deeming that somebody's a good person or a bad person or even a good expert. It's just more about being aware of some things that might come out between a role and a candidate, because I think it goes both ways, the fit. And also, I mean, nowadays there's just so much going on with globalization, with remote working, and companies generally have a pretty big pool to choose from. Also, recruiters are more savvy with active sourcing, and it is easier to reach a lot of people, but it is by all means not simpler to make hiring decisions. So I think that red flags are something that we oftentimes oversee when searching for talented people. And I think it's quite important also to talk about that and how data can help us in this and how we can really just make better informed decisions.
And do you, just a question to that, do you have like an example that you saw maybe a couple of times already? So a red flag that has been overseen or that people tend to oversee easily? Is there something where you can say, yeah, this is one of those?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, oftentimes I think people kind of mistake ambition or as something either good or bad, which is not good or bad. It really depends on the spot you're looking to fill. I think people also kind of see themselves in the candidate. There's a lot of bias, and then they're just unaware. And then I mean hiring managers, right? And then when you're like a third party looking at it, you can really spot a lot of things. And also my background is in psychology, so I kind of have this bug in my head, I guess, that I tend to look at things that way to just spot what can go wrong. But I mean, oftentimes I would say that hiring decisions are rather made on what we think people are, and we don't really measure well who they are and what they do. Things look great on paper, but then 3 months in, 6 months in, who is this person? We didn't hire this person. They were so different. So yeah, that happens often, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the one thing I used to keep telling everybody when it comes to interviewing. Do not take a decision based on assumptions and really try to collect as much objective criteria as possible and really try to figure out whom we are looking for and who is the person sitting in front of us in the interview, right? And I really like your top talent approach. That's just a short interjection because we are not looking for the best person on the globe. We are looking for the person who is the most suitable person for now. And that's also something people oftentimes confuse with whatever A players and top talent and talent density and all of that stuff. But I guess that's leading us somewhere else from the initial topic. So what would be your approach when it comes to eliminating those red flags in disguise, to really being able to collect as much objective evaluation criteria as possible when it comes to interviewing persons?
So the first thing is I would make people conscious of all of this. And I don't mean just hiring managers. I also mean talent acquisition teams, HR teams in general. I feel like in the last few years, especially in the IT bubble, there's been a lot of like hire 10 developers by tomorrow and things like that. And there wasn't such focus on high quality. I mean, again, I don't like to use that when I speak about people. I feel like it's quite narcissistic view, but still, I feel like talent acquisition teams have lost their ability to do selection. They just do acquisitions and attraction. But what about selection? So I think that it's really important to educate, upskill hiring teams, talent acquisition teams on bias, also on different measures that you can take, what has good validity, what doesn't, why you should maybe not use reference checks, why you should use situational questions, all sorts of those things. So education, also I think companies would benefit from having this accountability and vulnerability when it comes to like making bias mistakes and like kind of understanding where this is coming from, because that can also lead to better decision making. And if we would just kind of work on that, not just interviewing for the sake of interviewing, like that's an easy task, but I think sitting with yourself and seeing like what kind of projections you do into other people, I think that can really benefit the hiring plan.
And I think that's a super important point. So you have the bias topic, and everyone's talking about bias, but what I rarely see is that you really reflect on the bias you have. It's not you might have, it's the bias you have during interviews. So, and it's just a nice topic because Christian, we just talked about it an hour ago, where I said that I had an interview with a person and I felt I had a bias, but I couldn't nail it down. So it was definitely like a primacy thing. So my first impression, I didn't have the good gut feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really did my interview, I did my scorecard and so on. And so afterwards, it's really about reflecting on it and trying to nail it down. We didn't come to the point to nail it down, so I still don't know. But I think that's an important point to look into. Okay, I have bias, so let's talk about it and let's think about it and not only do it once in a training. Hey, there's a halo effect. I think most people can tell you something about unconscious bias, but I rarely see it used in a recruiting process. So that's like a super important point from my perspective. And the other one you said, just to add to that, is the topic that recruiters do not select, which I find actually very sad, because those are the people who really know who know better about bias or should know. And often this is a role thing. So the accountability in the organization, the role of the recruiter is not properly designed. So what happens if you have an interview with the hiring manager and the recruiter, and the hiring manager says yes, and the recruiter says no? Is there a process attached to it? What happens? And that's also something I don't see very often.
Yeah, definitely. On the topic of bias, I just want to say that I don't think a good interviewer is one that doesn't have bias. We are all humans, we all have bias. Even AI has bias. But I think a good interviewer is one who's aware of having bias. And then kind of sitting with it, seeing, is this something mine? Is this something that should go into the background for now? Or is this like something I'm sure of and should be a focus? Yeah, well, when it comes to selection, I think it should really be something that we do together. I miss this togetherness in these decision-making processes. I think recruiters can really bring a lot to the table, even if they don't make the final decision, to help form this final decision, because they're the ones who can really select what you want to measure. If you're gonna what measure you will even use to select people, if you're gonna do interviews, if you're gonna do different tests, work samples, whatever. And they can also extract data from it to then help make the final hiring decision. And I think this is an important thing, that okay, you can make a gut feeling, you can have a gut feeling and then make a decision based on that, but you should definitely also make a decision based on data. I've often had an experience where a hiring manager would have the final interview, and then they would say, I need to sleep on it. And I would also kind of want to add to that, like, okay, sleep on it, and then also look at the data, because I think it's a package that we need to do. The more, the better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you bring up a lot of very interesting topics. Ina almost stole my punchline on you saying TA teams have lost their ability to do proper selection. I would challenge that and then actually ask a little bit mean, have we ever had the ability to do proper selection? Probably not. I know that people don't want to hear it, but overall, if you look at the complete recruiting landscape, I guess it's still that people need some more training to really do proper selection, because it's not easy. And you also need to have a lot of stuff in place when it comes to the process itself, because the process and how you structure your interviews have a very strong impact on your ability to select people. And also what you said, and I'm a strong supporter of that, TA and recruiting needs to help hiring managers take a good decision. We can weigh in our evaluation as well, and we have to do it. And we also need to have the mandate to say no and then not move forward with a candidate. But recruiting and talent acquisition is not responsible for hiring. The responsibility is always 100% at the hiring manager, because it's their team, it's their open role, it's their responsibility to fill the open slot, not ours. Ours is to make sure that we all pick the most suitable person for it, but I will not take over responsibility for a hire, because I actually also cannot I cannot judge the skills in engineering, right? And I'm not the one to do the programming challenge or whatever. We have the responsibility to make sure it's a proper process. We kind of bring in all the needed information, and we enable everybody to take a decision. That's our responsibility. Hiring? No. Unless it's for our own team, then yes. But so for in general, I'm a very strong supporter in pushing the responsibility to the business and not to us. I see Ina a bit disagreeing.
I might challenge this a little bit. So I'm fully into when you say it's the hiring manager's position, but I would prefer to talk about shared responsibility. So obviously, when it comes to the functional expertise, it's the hiring manager. But what about culture? What about values and so on? And I think here when you have a team of interviewers, we have to talk about a shared responsibility, because maybe the hiring manager might not see it's not a cultural fit, but I see it. And then who has the responsibility that we bring in the brilliant jerk into the company, as an example? And this is where you say, on the one hand, we need a mandate to say no, because that would be my obvious mandate, to say no, right? Functionally, it's a perfect candidate, and then it's not a good person, or not someone. No, it's maybe not the right person. When we talk about values in the company, it's not a match. Then I have to take responsibility to say no and fight for this also.
We are not disagreeing on that point. It's just we are viewing it from different perspectives. I say we need the mandate to say no. And if we have that mandate fully implemented into the recruiting process, one no will suffice and we do not hire that person, because that's the agreed on process and the agreed on way of recruiting. If we do not have that mandate, for instance, and we as a recruiter say no, but the hiring manager still decides on hiring that person, it's his or her responsibility, not ours. And we cannot override that responsibility. So in the end, again, the responsibility lies with the hiring manager. If we say we cannot, well, we have a 100% yes rule and we do not find any objective reasons to change a no to a yes, for instance, because it's just gut feeling and we cannot prove anything, well, then again, it's still, for me, it's always the hiring manager who has the final say. No, not the final say, but who has the full responsibility on hiring, not us. And it's also, if you turn it around, right? If the hiring manager is not super supportive when it comes to hiring, and when they don't see the necessity to move forward fast, it's also their responsibility, right? And if they don't see the need to hire for their team fast, who am I to change it? I can tell them once, right? Well, that's what we actually agreed on. You told me it's super urgent and we need to hire that person on time. But if that is not mirrored in the style of collaboration, it's also on the hiring manager. It's not me then forcing those people to speed up. I can try, because I know most likely the business impact, probably, and I can speak about the business impact if you don't hire that person. But still, I cannot make them, or I cannot force them to be fast or take recruiting serious, and then it's their bad and not mine. But again, I think we are a bit moving away from the original topic, so let's try to circle back a bit on that, because when I was preparing for this podcast, and actually I really did a bit this time, I came across one of the how can I say, decision matrices I actually use when I train hiring managers. And basically we are speaking about false positive and false negative hiring decisions. So basically you have a positive, or you have two red flags, and they can be they have a different impact. So for instance, if you have a person who is very good at presenting themselves, right? He's very outspoken, very good in communication, and you do not manage to break that facade and really deep dive into how good they are at their job, you might make, or it's quite likely that you offer that person and that you hire that person, and then only later figure out that it's just not there, right? The person is not living up to your expectations, also not being able to fill that role. And on the other hand, it's the opposite. You quite frequently run into a situation where the candidates are super shy and they are nervous and they are more on the introvert side of life. And if you do not manage to really make them speak up and show how good they are, you might lose a very good future colleague because, again, you did not manage to find out how good they are. And I guess that's also something we really need to be fully aware of when speaking with people, that we can be fooled very, very easily. So, Sibila, how can we make sure we do not fall into those traps?
Well, I think so. If you have, sometimes it's really fine to have somebody who is just really good at presenting themselves. I mean, if obviously if they're not prone to counterproductive work behavior, if that fits their role, if they're in a sales role, if they're in some sort of customer support role, and sometimes it just doesn't work. What I think is important is to really draft what do you need, who do you need, and because I feel like sometimes we go blindly into interviewing, and we just know what it says on the job description, what kind of skills they need to have, but we don't really sit and talk, okay, do you need this person to be a bit like, what is the dynamic in the team? I feel like we don't know so many things, and yet we go in and make decisions. And I think that's just blind leading the blind. So I think first these conversations that are also sometimes maybe a bit hard to have. People are unaware of these things. So I think just to avoid this, it takes a lot of conversation, it takes a lot of education, and then it also takes finding the right measures. Does it make sense to do like a situational interview? Does it make sense to do, I don't know, a work sample, an integrity test? There's so many different things. They have different validity. Just picking out the right tools that you can then later measure and collect data from, I think that's really important. And it's always cyclical because you can really make conclusions from previous hiring decisions. And just having this mindset in the company that things are not made from gut feeling, they're made from data, which is an obvious thing, but it's not really there. So yeah, and I think that there needs to be really strong collaboration between the hiring teams and between talent acquisition, because without that, it just doesn't work. There needs to be trust, and there needs to be psychological safety that you can really say, hey, I feel like for your team, I don't know, because they're already like this, like that. You don't need a fourth person like that. Maybe you need a disruptor. I said now a lot of different things, but I would for sure just start with let's sit and what we actually need and what is.
Which leads to Christian's favorite topic, the kickoff meeting. I assume, sorry, stealing your next one here. But before you go into the kickoff meeting, which I find very, very important also, I think I was just thinking about, I'm supporting a smaller company at the moment, and talking about data. Here, I really start with, let's define, so I do that during a kickoff meeting, but let's define what are the top 5 things I need to ask the candidates. So very, very easily, right? Really think about those 5 questions or those 5 topics we have to ask every candidate, because the hiring managers are partly quite inexperienced, and then they have a nice talk, but without a guidance and without a little scorecards that they have to fill in. I start really very, very small. They have 5 candidates and they will do 5 very different interviews. So I think it's also sometimes important to think about like more mature organizations who have a certain standard in place. And what I figured out since Christian and I started to also support smaller, maybe non-tech companies and so on, is that sometimes you really need to start very, very small with, hey, let's ask the candidates all the same questions, at least go through the same topics. And then we create a super important set of data. So like this start small is even very, very important from my point of view.
And there's so many small things that you can do. I mean, sometimes just having a more in-depth conversation during the kickoff means everything. Sometimes just having scorecards means everything. Sometimes just kind of, I don't know, like giving a chance to a candidate that you wouldn't before, and then gathering data from that can also mean everything. So it's I feel like as we move on, it's becoming more and more messy to do proper selections. There's more skills, there's more like hiring, there's more people in the hiring teams, and we're just overcomplicating it, and sometimes just simplifying it and just starting from basics, I think, can do wonders. Yeah.
I guess basics is the keyword again. And yes, I am a huge fan of a proper kickoff meeting, because if you do a lot of stuff right at the beginning, everything else falls in place very, very easily, right? So the more work and dedication you put into setting up everything properly, the easier it is to take a decision, and a proper decision afterwards. And when you decide on hiring a new person, you need to define everything that you need to define, right? You need to define the level of skills. You can do it in any way you want. You can have whatever, a Likert scale, you can have a scale from 1 to 10, but you need to define the baseline of what you need when it comes to skills. And you need to define a baseline of what you need when it comes to whatever social interaction and fitting the missing puzzle piece for your team. And that then needs to be the criteria you evaluate against, and always against the role. So you interview a candidate, you have your role, you have the candidate, and then you decide, does the candidate fit all the stuff I need for the role? And that already is data collection, and you have proper data points that you hopefully, I say hopefully, document properly in the scorecard, so that you understand 1 month later why you took that decision. Because if you don't document, you won't know. And that also feeds into one of the things you mentioned earlier, Sibila: hiring managers asking to sleep one night over before taking a decision, right? It's pretty easy. They will not change the decision, because how could they? As 24 hours after the interview, you actually are down to 20% of remembering what actually was being said during that conversation.
Yes.
How can you take a decision, right? And you can have notes, but you don't know, well, when did they say that? Did they really say it? What was the question I asked, right? So it's a nonsensical thing to do to sleep over it. You do the interview, you sit down, you write your scorecard, you take your decision.
But then usually there's something behind that sentence. I need to sleep over it. Or the other sentence I know is, I need to see some more candidates.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Christian, it's your big favorite. I know.
Fair.
And then, like, from my experience, then there's something that's disturbing the hiring manager, which might be some bias they have. That's something. It might be also an insecurity and an issue with decision making. Am I making the right decision here for the company? So there's an insecurity in the hiring manager. And so what I find very interesting is then to really ask the why. And if you have a good relationship with the hiring manager and you really go into that deep dive into, okay, what exactly is it that you want to sleep over it, or that you want to see more candidates, because then something is disturbing you. So what is it? Let's nail it down. I think that's then the interesting conversation.
For sure. And there's a challenge there too, because sometimes they're not even sure what it is. And that's why I think we need to really talk about it before we start everything. And they really need to be like, if you're taking the responsibility to interview somebody in your company, I think you really should go through a specific training, not just what is polite and impolite, but also like, what am I projecting onto others? what is halo effect? What is like also this thing that you said, Christian, when they sleep on it, the next day their memory is not as good. And then they tend to remember things that were kind of more emotional for them. So like if they really liked somebody like as a whole, but not just for their skills, they tend to remember what happened at the end of the interview, at the beginning of the interview. But there's a lot of issues with that. And it just really needs to be a good relationship. Like you said, that the recruiter can ask, what is it exactly that you need to sleep over, and what do you need to compare these candidates with? And I also think that there's another thing there, and that's that sometimes the responsibility for making a hire is just too heavy on them. So that's why sometimes things drag out, because they don't want to look bad if they make a bad decision. And I see that a lot in startups as well, where people are first-time leaders or their first time like interviewing for such a position. And then it's just such a heavy responsibility. So sometimes it's also kind of an issue with the whole culture of the company, the culture of accountability in the company. So I think that before people start interviewing and making hiring decisions, they should be comfortable about being in that seat.
And I think in combination, that was something you said before, Christian, was having a scorecard so that in 1 month you still know why you hired the person. Now I'm with my HR hat on, because this recruiting data, those scorecards, can be just so important for a learning organization. So if you made a wrong decision during the hiring process, it's okay. It will happen. We all did hires that were actually not the perfect fit for the company. We all maybe took jobs where we figured out that maybe it was not the perfect fit between me and the company. So that's human. That's normal. But as an organization, I think it's so important to have those scorecards. And then if within the first year, you are losing a person, should it be that the person decides you're not the right company for me, or we decide it's not the right person for our company, you can look into the scorecards, then you look into the exit reasons, and then you compare and you find blind spots, and you find where you can improve your hiring process, or where you maybe what are dimensions you did not look at. So maybe you found the perfect person from a functional perspective, and you said that, Sibila, before, what's something the team is missing. So maybe it was a very shy person in a team of super loud people, and he or she never kind of arrived. Things like that, I had that before. And it helps you to have those scorecards to get better and better and better. So, yeah.
Yes, and sometimes also people don't like data or scorecards or anything like that. They find it bureaucratic or just boring, and it doesn't need to be boring. It can really be made very interesting. You can use a lot of gamification in the process. There's all sorts of creative things that you can do with it. And also data is your ally. So I think like it's just educating yourself, knowing what is happening, and data. So yeah, just like if there's like a magical recipe, I would say it's those three things.
I love that sentence, Sibila. I just wrote it down. Data is your ally.
Me too. Actually, me. And it's also a very good end statement, so to say, of the previous conversation. And before we really kind of close down, Sibila, could you just give one final piece of advice when it comes to selecting the most suitable person in recruiting? Maybe Ina, you start, and Sibila, you have the final say today.
Be honest, especially when defining your requirements. And I think that's not only doing the job description, but in the kickoff meeting, really think about what am I looking for? What is the right person for me? So, and be very honest there. I think that's the main thing.
Good.
I would say that when you're measuring these types of things, if somebody's going to be successful in a job, you need to be aware that you're measuring something that's intangible, and that always when there's psychological things, there's mistake in measuring them. So just don't be so hard on yourselves. We're all human. We're measuring human concepts, and making mistakes is fine, but we just need to be aware of it. That's all. It's not about being these superb creatures that make no mistakes. It's about just kind of sitting with our bias and doing our best.
Yeah, that's right. So I guess we will never be able to be 100% correct when it comes to hiring. And also it's for everybody, even us in recruiting, a continuous learning path, right? There will always be new things we will learn. And honestly, after how many years, 16, 17 years of recruiting, I still do shitty interviews every now and then. And you just cannot avoid it, right? That's life. So, Ina, Sibila, that was a very cool conversation. Thank you very much for joining. Have a great rest of the day and goodbye. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Das war's für heute. Vielen Dank, dass ihr bis zum Ende dabei geblieben seid und bis zum nächsten Mal.